joining us now on the phone, is, I think, probably the most controversial, and if you're online, the most hated politician of the new government. That's amongst a certain quite specific group of people and activists and other politicians. But most certainly this year, once we got through the Golriz Garament shoplifting brouhaha, the issue that now shapes as, well, getting the most headlines in the mainstream media is that of the Treaty Principles Bill, which has engendered a raft of hysterical reporting and claims from people like Margaret Mutu, Debbie Narewa Paka, the Labour opposition, Rawiri Waititi, Willie Jackson, who's a member of that Labour opposition, and academics and great people from across the nation who have said our next guest is a racist and a white supremacist, and there is going to be civil war in this country. I think it's been remarkable, mostly because it's not true. To find out how he's coping with this, we're joined now by David Seymour. David, welcome to the program. Congratulations on the new job too, the new portfolio.
Oh, well, thanks, Sean, and I hope you're having a good year so far.
Yeah, well, we fixed the water, let's try and fix the treaty. Look, I want to start this interview by going through what I think are some of the perpetual disinformation which surrounds the Treaty Principles Bill. The first one is, and I have seen journalists repeat this, and I have seen academics repeat this, and politicians opposed to you repeat this, that you are seeking to rewrite the Treaty of Waitangi. That is what this bill does. Can you speak to that claim?
I'm very happy to. We have no intention of rewriting the Treaty of Waitangi, the English version, or Te Tiriti, or Waitangi, the Maori version. Those texts are 184 years old on Tuesday, and they will remain just as they are. What we're interested in doing is continuing a process that actually has been going on for 40 years, and that is defining what these principles of the treaty are. Now, you've got to back up a little bit. What are they? Well, they come out of legislation going through Parliament in the 80s that said the government must follow the principles. The problem was Parliament passed that law. Parliament has never said anything about what the principles are. And over the past 40 years, a combination of the courts, the Waitangi Tribunal, the public service, have all developed their view of what the principles of the treaty are. But you'll notice that there's never been a proper debate in Parliament. There's never been a proper debate that most people can be engaged in. So people say, we're trying to change the principles. Well, actually, everyone's been trying to change the principles except for the overwhelming majority of New Zealanders for the last 40 years. And what we're doing is bringing everybody in to say, okay, well, if these principles are the way we look at the treaty from the present day, then what are those principles?
Are those principles, as currently interpreted by the Crown, are they written down anywhere, substantively, definitively?
Yeah, they are. I mean, the government, the Long government in 1989, set out a set of principles. The court in 1987, at what they called the Lands case, made some commentary on what the principles should be. That was the first time that they were really set out. And over that time, you've seen people like the Waitangi Tribunal try to further develop them. Under the current Treaty of Waitangi Act, it's left to the Waitangi Tribunal to interpret the principles and ensure that the government of the day sticks to them. And they are basically that the government has a duty of partnership and of active protection of Māori. And the issue with that we see is that it's upholding ideas that people should have rights and dignities, but only for Māori. And we just make the point that the government should have those kinds of obligations to all New Zealanders. if it has those obligations only to Māori, there are a couple of issues. One is which people exactly, because there's about 750,000 people who whakapapa say that they're Māori in their ancestry, but they all have a lot of other ancestry too, so it's not obvious where you draw the line. And the second issue is, if you can solve the first problem, you've still got a bigger one, which is, okay, so how is a country supposed to work when there are two sets of political and legal rights, and some people will get consulted on land use development because of their ancestry. Some people will get positions such as the Māori co-CEO of the Human Rights Commission. Some people would have at least sat on the Three Waters representation boards. It's not a very good blueprint for a country. Most countries
So that's the first principle. What are the others that you think need debating?
Well, the rest of them I don't actually think are too bad. I mean, the Longi principle also said that the government has the right to govern. We would actually say that should be put in place. They also said that there should be equality before the law. We think that should stay. It's this idea that there is a partnership between the Crown and Māori that gives some people a different set of political and legal rights to participate in public life.
Which is the principle which underpins co-governance, right?
Well, co-governance, as it's appeared under the Labour government, is just a logical extension of that partnership idea.
Right. So we have narrowed this down to what the issue that you have, and I would argue, given the election result, many New Zealanders have, with the principles of the treaty. For those who are not deep into this, what does your bill therefore propose as regards what you consider that contentious treaty principle?
So my bill takes the literal reading of the Māori text, and it says in 3 articles, the treaty says the government has the right to govern, that we all have self-determination or tirorangatira over our individual sovereignty and our property and so on, and that we all have the same rights and duties, again from the treaty, ngā tikanga katoa rite tahi. So, I mean, we are taking exactly what the Māori version says and saying these are the principles. The government has the right to govern, we all have the right to self-determination in our lives, and we all have the same rights and duties.
But partnership would go.
We don't believe that the treaty is a partnership between races. That should be gone. That is something that emerged in the 1980s. It was not part of the treaty. I know Dame Anne Salmond has been one of the fiercest critics of this partnership idea. She says it's a 1980s neoliberal idea where everyone's part of a corporate group. Interestingly, Anne Salmond is now reversing at a tremendous rate.
Yes, she is.
She's been interpreted as supporting me, and she's obviously had lots of bad feedback from her university mates on that one. But nonetheless, we believe that the principles should reflect what the Māori version actually said, and it should be a set of principles that are workable with a liberal democratic society in 2024 and beyond.
Okay. I think you've very well and clearly we've got to the point that we need to have the debate about. Does your bill suggest we have a referendum on that point?
Well, there is no bill at this point, so that is still in debate. ACT's policy is to pass that bill and put it to referendum. Obviously, now we're engaged in a political negotiation. We want the other two parties to keep voting for this bill past the first reading. I think there should be a referendum. If we could get a bill passed without a referendum, that would be a major advance on where we are now. If we could have a referendum where, first of all, everyone gets to directly have a say on it, and second of all, it sends a message to the courts and the bureaucracy that this is actually a bit bigger than all the other laws that Parliament's passed, and it would make it harder for a future government to reverse it. If this was passed by referendum, they would need. All
right, so a referendum isn't a given. If your idea is strong enough, good enough, your lobbying is good enough, you could have this passed by a majority in Parliament.
that's the plan. So we've got our coalition partners honouring the agreement to, draft the bill, introduce the bill, debate the bill, send the bill to a select committee, get public submissions, get a report back from the select committee. Then we've got to persuade them to keep voting for it to make it a reality. And, I had this experience with end-of-life choice. We introduced a bill. What came out the other end wasn't quite the same as what we put in. That's true, and I still think there's issues surrounding that. But nonetheless, we got the bill passed, and that, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, is the democratic process in action.
All right. It appears, however, your coalition partner, National, is most uncomfortable about this process and is certainly coming under intense pressure in social and mainstream media to abandon you, to make it a dead duck and say we won't go past first reading. I think Mr. Luxon's been very careful about his responses to those questions. But you are most definitely fighting an uphill battle, and it does not seem that the National Party is prepared. Well, I don't know. They're standing on the sidelines, perhaps. They're not joining your side yet.
Well, sure, but I mean, I just say to people, in a democracy, the way politicians make decisions day to day tends to be influenced by where public sentiment's going. So, it's at least 9 months until a select committee will report back, and there'll be a second reading possibility. And I say possibility because when it gets reported back, it still has to get time in the House to be debated. So let's give it at least 9 months, see how that whole process of public submissions on select committee and the select committee report back, and who knows, maybe the debate will become a bit more rational and the opponents will start debating the content of the debate rather than just throwing around, racist abuse. And we might find that we're in a different place by then. I would put more weight on those factors at the time than what people may or may not be saying now.
All right. There was a leak, or supposedly a leak, and the people who got the leak were Rawiri Waititi and Mikey Sherman, I think, from TVNZ, or a reporter from TVNZ. That leak was of supposedly a report, though it doesn't seem it was, on the proposed bill. If there is no proposed bill yet, what the hell was that memo from Justice?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, number one, no minister had seen that. It wasn't advice that had gone to Cabinet. It wasn't anything that, was part of any elected government minister's thinking at the time. It was basically drafted up, and the first people to see it were apparently Rawiri Waititi and someone at TVNZ. So that's the first thing. It was hardly a major part of the government's consideration. The second thing is, if there's no bill, why was there advice? Well, you have to get advice, before you draft a bill. You're supposed to ask the department, the bureaucracy, what do you think we should do? And they produce that stuff all the time. A couple of things about this particular paper. It wasn't really about the bill. It was more about, trying to get a place in line for the bill to be debated in Parliament, which is another, you've got to do that to, otherwise your bill won't get debated. And then it had a whole lot of commentary. Now, you put all that together, no minister had seen it. It was supposed to be a procedural thing. It had a whole lot of extra commentary. It got sent to the opposition and the media before any minister from government. And I think you can probably draw from that it was basically one or two people perhaps within the Ministry of Justice sounding off. Well,
have they been spoken to? Because that's a complete waste of taxpayers' money if they're doing stuff they're not meant to and not asked to.
Well, first of all, they were meant to prepare a paper to eventually get a place in the queue for the bill. The leak, however, is very serious, and some of the commentary was not necessary, to say the least. And yes, I mean, I when I became the Associate Justice Minister, I had a meeting with Andrew Kibblewhite, the Chief Executive of Justice. And yes, I mean, I think he understands that, it's something that needs to be taken very seriously, because when the public service do this, they're not letting down me. They're letting down the entire public service, everyone that works there. There are actually people that are proud to work in New Zealand's tradition of a politically neutral public service that is there to serve the government of the day.
Well, the timing was remarkable because it was just before the magical hui at Ngarawahia, where 4,000 people suddenly became 10,000 people. And of course, you weren't there, and there was lots of anger and revolt, and then there was Ratner, and you weren't there again. It seems opponents of this discussion, and I'm not going to say because we don't have the proposals yet, opponents of having this debate are pretty front-footy, pretty aggressive about trying to shut this down, David. Why do you think that is? And I want to ask you where you think the most serious opposition to this is coming from. Is it from opposing politicians or from the mainstream news media?
Well, you're going to get me off with a tough question. Look, I think both of them, and clearly some elements in the public service, are very committed to the idea that New Zealand is a partnership between races, that there's got to be a special place for Māori in public affairs for historical reasons, and then that kind of gets mixed up with, well, there's inequality, so, the special place in politics will somehow fix the inequality. And it's hard for them to get away from that. But what we're doing, I think, is right. We are advancing the simple idea that universal human rights are at the core of our national identity, and the way to look at our treaty is not the way the courts, the tribunal and the public sector have looked at it for the last 40 years, but to go back to what it actually says and say, actually, this is a blueprint for a modern, multi-ethnic, liberal democratic state with people from all over the world who all feel equally incorporated into a society that has a place and equal dignity for all.
Okay. You didn't answer my question. Where is most of the opposition coming from? Because I sat a week ago in a Prime Ministerial press conference and watched a lot of the mistruths and disinformation being repeated ad infinitum by the gallery. I note that our largest and most influential public broadcaster, TVNZ, essentially does have a two-tiered management structure in accordance with this interpretation of partnership and the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. So you have a major news organisation that is, it would seem to me, philosophically opposed to this political debate.
Yeah, and look, I know I don't want to sound like I'm dodging your question, but, it's actually pretty difficult to say which one is most opposed. My point is that
they are both opposed.
I think that's true. But the point is that this idea of the treaty as a partnership has become so ingrained that it's going to take an enormous effort to reverse it. And of course, you're going to be called all sorts of names and so on. But at the end of the day, it's the right thing to do.
Mm. Well, look, I hope it doesn't drive you to shoplifting, David, but have you noted an uptick in pressure? Have you had to up security? And I know these probably aren't the questions someone like you is going to play to or want to answer, but I think they are relevant in the current context.
Look, there's always a danger, no matter what you do. And I remember a few years ago, there was a poor British MP who I think was stabbed, and some of my friends said, this is a very dangerous job you've got, that could happen to you. I said, you've got to be kidding. I'd be in much greater danger if I became a firefighter or a forester or started working on a fishing boat. I mean, those are dangerous jobs. In my experience, being a member of Parliament in New Zealand, and there's always a chance that some crazy person...
Well, what I'm asking, David, is given the rhetoric we have seen this year, have you been advised to up security? Are you more wary?
No. If I'd had advice about security...
You wouldn't be able to tell me.
It would be serious and I wouldn't talk about it. But no, I mean, I'm not more wary. My experience of walking around the city is no different from ever before. And if anything, we've had a huge amount of people being very supportive in the last few weeks. So, look, I don't see a difference. And my experience in Waitangi has always been that the press put the most dramatic stuff on the news at 6 because, if it bleeds, it leads, whereas the actual environment up there is much more conciliatory.
I want to ask you just quickly, because he is our next guest after the news at 7:30, is this a development of the debate that Don Brash tried to start at Orewa all those years ago?
Well, I think it's related. I mean, if you go back to his speech at that time, what Don was really saying is we need to find a way to incorporate some of the good values that make societies work, universal human rights, equality before the law, into our debate about the treaty. And I guess we're saying a very similar thing today, albeit that, the developments that have occurred since, I think at that time, it would have been quite difficult to imagine, the level of co-governance that has emerged from this partnership idea. But here we are.
And finally, how are you going to have this debate? How do you win this argument if the vast majority of the Fourth Estate and established news media are against you and don't even want this debate to occur?
Well, they've thought that for a long time, but you look at a poll that Curia did, and I think it was published in the Herald about 3 or 4 months ago. 60% of New Zealand agrees with our view of the treaty. 18% oppose it. That's 3 to 1. When asked, should we have a referendum, 45% say yes, 25% say no, the remaining 30% not sure. So, that's 2 to 1 amongst people that have come to a conclusion. So, there is, so a lot of bias out there, and I agree there's been some pretty crazy reporting on some of this stuff. However, that's been going on for a long time, and New Zealanders still overwhelmingly want to see this debate happen, and they agree with the underlying liberal principles that ACT's advancing.
Right. And look, last question, only because a bunch of trolls have been sending me texts and I want to shut them up. Are you a member of the Atlas Group? What is the Atlas Group? Is it some secret organisation that controls your every thought and move?
Well, I've heard this. I guess it's kind of a modern day left wing conspiracy theory. It's kind of like, I guess, Pizzagate for hippies by the sounds of it. And the short answer is they're referring to the Atlas Economic Research Foundation, which is a think tank in Washington, D.C. And no, I'm certainly not a member.
Did you used to work for them?
Contact with them. I've never worked for them. I worked for another think tank, and I visited with them a few times, but mostly 15 years ago, which was, what a lot of people were doing who worked for think tanks in North America at that time. So no, it's a pretty insane conspiracy theory. And if you actually go on their website and look at what Atlas do today, I mean, they mainly focus in developing countries, promoting free markets in places that are often subject to enormous despotism.
Yeah. So, and another quick grab bag, should we be funding the United Nations Relief Works Agency?
Tough one, because do you want to punish 90% for the sins of 10%, which seems to be, most of them actually are doing good work, and it's a desperate place where help is needed by pretty desperate people, most of whom didn't want anything to do with this war. On the other hand, 10% are pretty evil, and the government of New Zealand has said it'll keep funding them. So obviously, as a member of the Cabinet, I support that decision. But you can see how it's challenging for a lot of people.
I thank you very much indeed for your time this morning, David, and congratulations on the new Associate Justice portfolio. Thank you for your time.
No, don't worry. Bye for now.
That is David Seymour, the ACT Party leader. That was pretty rational. If you don't understand, listening to that, you should understand what this is all about.